No one knew she was trained by a legendary sniper until a single shot spoke the truth. No one in the camp ever looked at her twice. She was just another shadow moving quietly among the tents, her presence small, her voice softer than the bark of orders and the echo of boots against gravel. She carried crates, cleaned rifles, prepared rations, tasks that fit the silent expectations of what a woman was allowed to be in war. The men never asked where she had come from, and she never offered. Some thought she was the daughter of a displaced farmer. Others whispered she had followed a brother or husband into the chaos. Nobody asked her directly. In war, people preferred easy stories, and she gave them none. But the truth lived in her hands, in the way her fingers brushed across weapons not like tools, but like memories, in the way her eyes lingered on landscapes as if calculating distance, wind, trajectory. The truth was hidden in her silence. She had been trained by someone whose name still echoed like a ghost through battlefields long gone, a sniper whose legend was whispered around campfires, the kind of soldier who could end a war with a single bullet. He had disappeared years ago, swallowed by time or rumor, but before vanishing, he had passed his knowledge to her, and she had carried it like a secret flame. She never told them because she knew what they would say. That she was too fragile, too small, too soft for such knowledge. That a woman could not inherit a legacy written in steel and blood. So she hid it, waiting, watching, silent, until the day silence itself could no longer hold. It came without warning, as war often does. The ridge had been quiet all morning, the sky pale and heavy with mist. Soldiers lounged, cleaning rifles, smoking in silence, their nerves stretched thin by days of battle. Then the first crack split the air, a shot so precise it shattered a helmet 2 feet from a soldier's skull. Chaos erupted instantly. Men dove behind sandbags, rifles raised, eyes scanning the mist. The enemy had snipers. Fear spread quickly. Snipers weren't like ordinary soldiers. They were ghosts with rifles, shadows that killed without warning, without sound, from distances too far to see. One shot already had the camp pinned down. Another would come soon. The SEAL captain barked orders, voice sharp. "Locate them! Find the nest!" But the men hesitated. Their rifles were useless against an enemy hidden beyond sight. And each second wasted was another second waiting for death. She watched them, strong men, trained men, shaken by an invisible threat. Her heart pounded, not with fear, but with something sharper. This was the moment the silence had been waiting for. Her eyes swept the ridge, noting the angles, the mist, the faint shimmer of movement far beyond what the others could see. Her breath slowed. Wind direction, distance, elevation. She had been taught to read landscapes like pages in a book, and this one told her exactly where death was waiting. She moved quietly, picking up a rifle abandoned near the sandbags. The men barely noticed until she climbed the nearest outpost wall, positioning herself with deliberate calm. A voice shouted after her, "What the hell are you doing?" But she didn't answer. Her silence was stronger than their disbelief. She lay flat against the cold earth, rifle pressed to her shoulder. Her hands didn't tremble. Her breathing slowed, matching the rhythm of her heart. Through the scope, the world narrowed, mist dissolving into clarity. And there it was, the faint outline of a figure hidden among rocks nearly a mile away. Invisible to everyone else, but not to her. Her finger tightened on the trigger. The weight of her mentor's lessons filled her veins. You don't pull the trigger, you release it. The shot is not yours. It belongs to silence itself. The crack echoed, sharp and final. For a moment, the battlefield froze. Then a distant body slumped from the rocks, rifle falling uselessly. The enemy sniper was gone. Silence swept the camp. Dozens of eyes turned to her, disbelief and awe colliding. The SEAL captain lowered his binoculars slowly, his jaw tight, his expression unreadable. "Who taught you to shoot like that?" he demanded, his voice rough. She stood slowly, dust clinging to her uniform, her rifle still steady in her hands. For a moment, she said nothing, letting the weight of silence speak first. Then her eyes lifted, calm, unbroken. "No one knew," she said quietly, "until now." And in that moment, every story they had told themselves about who she was shattered like glass. The echo of her shot still lingered when the camp began to breathe again. Men peeked from behind sandbags, blinking into the mist as though expecting the bullet to return, as though disbelief itself might take shape and strike them down. But the ridge was quiet now. The invisible ghost that had pinned them into silence had been silenced itself. She lowered the rifle slowly, her movements precise, deliberate, almost ritualistic. Her face was calm, her breathing steady, as though what she had done required no effort at all. But inside, her chest burned, not with doubt, but with release. Years of silence, years of carrying a truth folded into herself, had finally opened with a single shot. The SEAL captain was the first to break the stunned stillness. He strode toward her, boots heavy against the broken earth, his eyes fixed on her as though seeing her for the first time. When he stopped a few feet away, his voice cut sharp against the morning fog. "That was no accident," he said. "You don't make a shot like that unless you've been trained." Her gaze held his, steady, unflinching. "I was," a murmur rippled through the men around them. Some laughed nervously, others shook their heads, a few stared in awe. None of them had expected it. The quiet woman who carried crates, who lived on the margins of their war, had just proven herself more dangerous than half the rifles in camp combined. The captain's eyes narrowed. Who? For a long moment, she considered silence. Secrets had kept her alive, protected her from ridicule, from dismissal, from the crushing weight of being told she could never belong. But the truth pressed at her lips now, like a bullet waiting to be released. "My father," she said finally, her voice quiet but unwavering. "You know his name. You've heard the stories? The sniper who never missed." The words seemed to ripple through the camp like fire through dry grass. Faces hardened, eyes widened. They knew the stories, everyone did. A man whose rifle was said to be cursed by accuracy, whose bullets traveled like whispers of death. A man who had disappeared into rumor years ago. To hear that his knowledge lived in her was to drag legend into flesh again. The captain's jaw tightened. That sniper was a ghost, a myth. Her lips curved into the faintest shadow of a smile. And yet here I am. The silence that followed was heavier than the gunfire had been. The men looked at her differently now, some with awe, some with suspicion, some with the stubbornness of those unwilling to let go of their disbelief. But none could deny the truth of what they had just seen. From that moment, the rhythm of the camp shifted. When they walked past her, their eyes lingered. When they spoke near her, their voices dropped, as though she carried not just skill, but the shadow of the legend who had trained her. They didn't ask questions, not directly, but she could feel their curiosity pressing against her like the weight of their stares. She ignored it. She had no interest in proving herself through words. She knew the sky would soon ask for another shot, and the truth would speak again through steel and silence. That night, as the camp settled uneasily, the captain summoned her to the operations tent. Maps lay scattered across the table, red marks cutting across valleys and ridges. His face was drawn, his eyes sharp, but beneath them flickered something she hadn't seen before. Not just skepticism, but reluctant respect. "You understand what you've done," he said. "One shot doesn't win a war, but it changes everything. My men look at you differently now. Some will respect you. Some will resent you. All of them will measure you by every bullet you fire from now on." She nodded once, her silence in agreement. "Tomorrow," he continued, "you'll prove it wasn't luck. Scouts report enemy movement in the valley. More snipers. If you can keep the ridge clear, then maybe, just maybe, we stand a chance of holding it." She didn't hesitate. "Then tomorrow, I'll take the shot." When she returned to her bunk, she opened her notebook. Her hands trembled as she wrote, the ink smudging across the page. "One shot is not proof. It is a beginning. They look at me now, but they do not see me yet. Tomorrow the sky will ask again, and I will answer. Not for them. For the truth that silence cannot bury." The next morning, mist hung heavy again, the valley below veiled in gray. Soldiers crouched low, rifles steady, eyes searching the unseen. She climbed to the outpost once more, her rifle cradled with the ease of memory. Through the scope, the world narrowed to light and shadow, a flicker. A glint, a shift in the mist. She saw it, the faint outline of a rifle barrel hidden among the rocks. Her breath slowed, her finger tightened. The shot cracked, and another ghost fell. This time, no one doubted. The camp exhaled as one, the silence breaking into murmurs of awe. And the captain's voice, low but steady, carried across the line. "She sees what we cannot. And that may be the only reason we survive." She lowered the rifle, her heart steady. The truth had spoken again, and war for the first time began to listen. The ridge began to carry her name without anyone speaking it aloud. Soldiers no longer looked through her as if she were invisible. They looked at her the way one looks at a compass in the middle of a storm, something they did not fully understand, but something that might point them toward survival. Her second shot had stripped away doubt. It wasn't luck. It wasn't coincidence. It was skill. Precision born not from chance, but from discipline, memory, and something deeper. The inheritance of silence itself. She had carried her father's ghost into the valley, and the ghost had spoken. But respect in war is never whole. With awe came whispers, questions sharp as blades. She must be exaggerating. She's using tricks. Maybe her father really was who she says. But that doesn't mean she is. She heard them all. She wrote them into her notebook at night, each word like shrapnel cutting the page. They don't understand. The bullet doesn't lie. The bullet speaks truth when silence no longer can. The SEAL captain summoned her again on the third morning. His eyes were tired, his uniform stained, but his posture was still iron. "They're testing us," he said, voice clipped. "Last night's attack wasn't full force. They're measuring us, preparing. And when they come, they'll send more snipers. They want us blind, afraid to lift our heads." He leaned closer, his tone sharpening. "That means you'll become their target. They'll know by now. They'll have seen what you can do. And they'll want to silence you before you speak again." Her reply was quiet, steady. "Then let them come. I'll answer." That night, she climbed the outpost alone. The mist was thicker, swallowing the valley whole. Through her scope, the world was nothing but gray shapes and faint shadows. Hours stretched. Her body ached, her shoulders screamed with each shift of weight, but her eyes remained unblinking. Then, movement. A flicker of reflection off glass. The subtle shimmer of breath in cold air. She recognized it instantly. A sniper, patient, hidden, waiting for the moment someone dared to lift their head. She adjusted slowly, every motion silent. Her breath fell into rhythm, her finger settling on the trigger. She whispered to herself words her father had drilled into her. The shot is not about killing. The shot is about ending silence before it ends you. The crack split the night. The enemy sniper fell, but this time she didn't lower the rifle. Because she knew one shot was never alone. Where there was one, there were two. She waited still, patient. And sure enough, another flicker appeared on the far ridge. Another ghost watching. Her heart pounded, but she did not rush. She steadied, measured, released. Another crack. Another silence broken. The camp below stirred with relief, with disbelief, with awe. The captain's voice came through the radio, low even. 2 shots. 2 ghosts gone. We hold the ridge tonight because of her. Yet she felt no triumph. Only the familiar emptiness that always followed a perfect shot. Killing never filled her, it hollowed her. Each bullet carried weight. Each silence broken was another silence added to her soul. That was the truth her father had left with her. The rifle speaks, but every word costs a piece of you. When she returned to camp, the men stepped aside for her. Some nodded. Some still avoided her eyes. But none laughed, none dismissed. The SEAL captain met her at the edge of the firelight. For once, his voice lacked command. It carried something closer to confession. "You've done more in 3 shots than most men do in a lifetime," he said. "But I need to know, how long can you keep speaking for us? How many truths can you fire before you run out?" She didn't answer immediately. She looked past him, past the camp, past the ridge, into the endless dark sky. Then she whispered, "As long as silence keeps asking." That night, she wrote in her notebook again, her words slow, heavy. No one knew. Not until I fired. But now they do. And every time they look at me, I see it in their eyes. Fear, respect, doubt, all tangled together. They don't need to know how many more shots I have left. Neither do I. The sky will decide. She closed the notebook, lay down, and let exhaustion take her. The ridge was quiet again, but it was not peace. It was waiting. And waiting, she knew, was only the silence before the next truth had to be spoken. The ridge no longer belonged to the soldiers alone. It belonged to her silence, her scope, her bullets that spoke when no one else dared to. The men knew it, even if few admitted it aloud. Some walked past her with a nod they would never have given before. Others avoided her entirely, as if looking at her meant confronting a truth they weren't ready to face. That the war they thought only men carried had always made space for someone like her. She did not seek their recognition. She sought only the horizon. Every dawn, she climbed the outpost, her rifle slung across her shoulder, notebook tucked beneath her arm. She would lie there for hours, watching, waiting. The camp trusted her now in ways they hadn't before, but trust is a fragile currency in war. She knew that each shot she fired bought them another day of survival, and each day they survived, the enemy grew hungrier to erase her. The SEAL captain, once skeptical, now kept her close. He called her into the operations tent more often, his finger tracing maps as he spoke of enemy movements, choke points, sniper nests. His tone was still sharp, but there was a new edge beneath it: reliance. He needed her eyes, her precision, her silence. And though he never admitted it aloud, she could see it in the way he glanced at her rifle, the way he paused before dismissing her. He knew the ridge might have already fallen without her, but admiration never walks alone. With it came envy. Whispers curled through the camp at night. She makes us look weak. She isn't one of us. If she misses once, we all die. She heard them, but she didn't flinch. She had been raised inside silence. Words, sharp or soft, had no power over her anymore. Only truth did. And the truth was written in every body she had dropped, every shot that had saved a life on the ridge. The fourth night came with mist so heavy it drowned even the closest shapes in gray. The men were tense, their nerves stretched, their eyes flicking to her more than to the darkness beyond. They trusted her now more than they trusted their own instincts. She climbed the outpost again, rifle in hand. Her body ached from days without real rest, but her hands were steady as ever. Through the scope, the world narrowed once more. Mist, shadow, silence, and then movement. A faint ripple in the fog. Too slow for wind, too deliberate for chance. She followed it with her scope, patient, waiting. Then she saw it, the curve of a barrel, the faint glint of glass. Another sniper. Her breath slowed, her finger steady. But before she fired, something in her gut tightened. She shifted her scope a few degrees and saw another. And another. 3 snipers, hidden in different pockets of the valley, their rifles trained on the ridge. They weren't just testing anymore. They were hunting her. She whispered into the silence, her father's words returning like echoes. One shot is truth. But truth is never alone. The enemy always answers. The first crack split the mist. She fired before the enemy did, her bullet tearing through the fog, silence breaking into flame. One body slumped. She shifted immediately, firing again, her shoulder screaming from the recoil. The second sniper fell, but the third fired first. The shot sang past her, close enough to split the wood beside her cheek. Splinters cut her skin, blood dripping down, but her hands didn't tremble. She adjusted, exhaled, and released. The last sniper dropped. The camp below exhaled as though the ridge itself had been holding its breath. Men shouted her name now, not just in awe but in desperation, as if her existence had become their lifeline. When she descended from the outpost, the SEAL captain was waiting. His eyes were hard but not with doubt. With something heavier, recognition. "They're not after the ridge anymore," he said. "They're after you. You're the line now." She wiped the blood from her cheek, her voice quiet, almost tired. "Then let them come. The silence will answer them." That night, her notebook filled faster than her hand could keep up. "They finally see me. Not as a woman. Not as an outsider. Not as a shadow. They see me as truth. And truth is dangerous. My father warned me, the rifle doesn't just kill. It unmasks. It shows the world what it didn't want to believe. And once it speaks, it cannot be silenced again." She closed the notebook, lay back on her bunk, and listened to the stillness of the camp. She knew what the captain hadn't said aloud, that the enemy would not stop until her silence was permanent. And yet, for the first time in her life, she felt no fear in being hunted. Because finally, the truth had a voice. And it sounded like a single perfect shot. The ridge was no longer a battlefield. It had become a stage, and she was the center of it. Every eye, friendly or hostile, turned toward her. The men in camp looked for her before every shift, their gazes flicking toward the outpost where she always climbed with her rifle. The enemy had begun to fire not at trenches, not at supply lines, but at the high points where they suspected her silhouette might appear. The war was bending itself around her. She felt it in her body. Every movement ached now, her shoulder raw from recoil, her vision strained from hours through the scope. But exhaustion could not outweigh duty. She carried more than her rifle. She carried expectation. For the camp, for the captain, for the ghost of her father whose voice still whispered in her head. A sniper is not a soldier of numbers. A sniper is a soldier of moments. And a single moment can change everything. The SEAL captain called her to the tent at dusk. His voice was sharper now, cut by urgency. Intel confirms what we feared. They know about you. They've sent their best. Her eyes narrowed, silent. They've brought a marksman, he continued. One of their elite. If he takes you out, the ridge collapses. You are the hinge holding this together. I need to know. He paused, and for the first time since meeting him, there was hesitation in his voice. Can you face someone trained like you? Her reply was quiet, calm, but edged with iron. I was trained for this moment. If he comes, I'll answer. That night, the valley was quiet. Too quiet. Mist clung to the ground like smoke that refused to rise. She climbed to the outpost, settling into position. Through her scope, the world narrowed, shadows stretching, silence deepening. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger, her breath slow. Minutes stretched into hours. Her eyes burned, her muscles stiffened, but she did not blink. She knew he was there, somewhere, watching her the same way she watched him. The duel had already begun, not with bullets, but with patience. She remembered her father's words. A duel between snipers is not about who fires first. It's about who breaks silence too soon. Her heartbeat slowed. Her thoughts stilled. Time ceased to exist. Then the faintest flicker. A reflection, no bigger than a drop of water in sunlight. Her breath caught, but she didn't move. She waited, listening to the silence, letting it stretch. And then she saw it. The slightest tilt of a rifle, the whisper of a shadow against stone. Her body reacted before thought did. She shifted, exhaled, released. The crack split the valley. A distant figure collapsed. The enemy marksman was gone. For a moment, the ridge was silent. Then the camp erupted. Shouts, cheers, relief so loud it seemed to shake the mist itself. Men clapped each other's shoulders, their voices breaking with awe. She got him. She took their best, but she did not celebrate. Her cheek still pressed to the cold earth, her scope still trained on the valley. She knew better. A sniper's duel never ended with one body. There were always more shadows. When she finally descended, the captain met her at the base of the outpost. His face was tight, but his eyes carried something heavier than before. You've proven yourself beyond question. Even their best couldn't touch you. But you understand what this means, she nodded. They'll send more. Not just more, he said quietly. They'll send everything. That night, she opened her notebook, her hands trembling but her words steady. Tonight, I faced someone like me. Trained, disciplined, patient. And I spoke first. My father once told me that victory in a duel is not proof of skill, but proof of silence. Tonight, silence chose me. But tomorrow it may not. And so I write these words knowing each entry could be my last. She closed the notebook and lay back on her bunk, listening to the night wind across the ridge. The camp slept easier now, believing the greatest threat had passed. But she knew the truth. The greatest threat was never a single shot. It was the weight of silence that always followed, demanding to be answered again. The duel had ended, but the war had not. Victory never lived long in the ridge. The camp celebrated quietly for a night, convinced that the shadow over them had lifted, that the enemy would retreat now that their best had fallen. But she knew better. A sniper's death was not an end, it was an invitation. The enemy did not scatter. They regrouped. Scouts returned the next morning with grim faces. New forces were arriving, heavier than before. They weren't just bringing rifles now. They were bringing artillery, drones, men who didn't need to outshoot her. They only needed to drown her. The SEAL captain summoned her again. His face was drawn, his voice steady but sharp. You've become more than a soldier to them. You're a symbol. They know if they take you down, the ridge will collapse. Not because you hold it alone, but because the men believe you do. That belief is our shield. And belief, like all shields, can break. She didn't argue. She had seen it in their eyes, the way the soldiers looked at her before they raised their own rifles, the way they hesitated until she fired first. Her silence had become their courage, and the enemy knew it. That evening, she climbed the outpost once more. Her body ached, her wounds pulsed with each step, but her mind was sharp. Through her scope, the valley stretched wide, quiet, deceptively calm. She knew calm. It was a mask. She waited, her breath slow, her heart steady. Time stretched. The mist thickened. And then the valley erupted, not with a single shot, Not with a duel, with fire. Mortars lit the horizon, artillery shells tore into the earth, drones streaked overhead. The ridge shook beneath the bombardment. Soldiers shouted, ducking for cover, dirt and smoke swallowing the trenches. She pressed her eye to the scope, searching through chaos. This was no hunt for the ridge. This was a hunt for her. They were trying to force her shot, to make her reveal herself. Her father's words echoed again. A sniper's greatest weapon is not the rifle. It is patience. Fire too soon and you give yourself away. Fire too late and silence buries you. She held still, her body pressed flat against the earth, her rifle unmoving. Shells burst around her, the sky torn by fire, but she did not flinch. Then there. In the smoke, the faint glint of glass. The enemy sniper, hidden among the chaos, waiting for her to betray herself. She exhaled slowly, her finger tightening. She released the shot. The crack split the bombardment. The figure dropped, but even as relief rushed her chest, she knew it wasn't over. Because another glint appeared. And another? 3 more. Her heart pounded, but her body remained steady. She shifted, fired again, one down. Shifted again. Another. Shifted. Her shoulder screamed, blood soaking through the bandage, but she didn't stop. The third sniper fell. The camp below roared, voices shouting her name, the captain's command cutting through. Hold! She's keeping them blind. Hold the line. Her scope blurred with smoke, her eyes burned, her body trembled, but she kept steady. Every shot was a sentence, every silence broken a word in a story only she could write. When the bombardment finally ceased, dawn broke pale and weak across the ridge. The enemy retreated again, leaving craters where trenches had been, fire where grass once grew. The camp was battered, but alive. She descended the outpost slowly, her legs heavy, her vision dimming at the edges. The men stepped aside for her now, their silence no longer disbelief but reverence. When she reached the bottom, the SEAL captain stood waiting, his face streaked with dirt, his eyes sharp. "You've become their fear," he said. "And our hope." "That's a dangerous place to stand," she met his gaze, her voice quiet but unshaken. "I don't stand for them. I stand for the silence. And the silence keeps asking." That night, she opened her notebook with trembling hands. Her words were jagged, ink-smeared, but true. The sky is louder now. Every shot echoes longer. They know me. They hunt me. But I am still here. Still answering. One day they may succeed. One day silence may claim me. But if that day comes, let it be said that silence spoke my name first. She closed the notebook and lay back, her eyes heavy, her body breaking. But her mind was clear. The war had changed. She was no longer hidden, no longer doubted. She was the target, and targets do not get to rest. The ridge no longer slept. Even in the rare hours when the sky was quiet, the men remained restless, their eyes darting toward the horizon as if expecting ghosts to crawl out of the mist. And always their eyes found her. She had become more than a soldier now. She was a talisman. Every man believed that as long as she could see the valley through her scope, they might live to see dawn. But belief is a dangerous gift. It sustains you while crushing you under its weight. She felt it every time she lifted her rifle. She was no longer shooting only for herself. Every breath, every pull of the trigger carried the entire ridge on its shoulders. Her body, however, was breaking. The recoil had bruised her shoulder black and purple. The wound beneath the bandage wept with each movement. Her eyes stung, bloodshot from days of refusing to close. Her hands shook when they weren't wrapped around the rifle. But when she aimed, when the valley narrowed to her scope, the tremor disappeared, and silence itself steadied her. The SEAL captain studied her more closely now. Where once he had doubted, now he watched with concern. He knew she was the thread holding the ridge together, but he also knew threads could snap. On the 7th evening, he called her into the operations tent. The lantern light flickered across maps littered with red marks. His voice was low, heavy. "Scouts report mass movement in the valley. This isn't another probe. They're coming with everything. Trucks, artillery, drones, more snipers. If we survive the night, reinforcements will reach us at dawn. But if we don't," he didn't finish. He didn't need to. Her eyes scanned the map, noting the choke points, the ridges, the possible nests. She said nothing for a long moment. Then calmly, "I'll be ready." The captain's jaw tightened. "You don't have to prove anything anymore. You've already done more than anyone. If you can't hold..." She cut him off with silence. Not with words, but with the look in her eyes. The same look she had the first day when she had stood in the hangar as he demanded if there was a combat pilot, if there was someone who would rise. It was the look of someone who had already decided. When the sun sank, the ridge fell into shadow. The air grew colder, heavier. The men tightened their grips on rifles, their knuckles white. The camp buzzed with attention too sharp to speak through. She climbed to the outpost, her rifle cradled as always, her body moving through pain like a ghost through walls. She pressed her cheek to the stock, her eye to the scope. The valley stretched wide, silent, waiting. Then the silence shattered. Artillery thundered from the hills, shells tearing into the earth, shaking the ridge. Drones swarmed overhead, their engines whining like vultures circling. Trucks rolled forward, headlights cutting through the mist. And somewhere hidden in the gray, the enemy's snipers waited, rifles trained upward, their scopes searching for her. She exhaled slowly, her finger resting lightly on the trigger. The first glint appeared, glass catching faint moonlight. She fired. A figure collapsed, another. She shifted, fired, shifted again. Her shoulder screamed, her breath ragged, but she didn't falter. Each shot bought seconds, each second bought survival. Below, the men shouted, fought, held the line. The captain's voice barked through the radio. "They're pushing hard! Hold them, just hold them. Hold, always hold." She clenched her teeth, her scope blurring with smoke, her body trembling, but her silence did not break. She saw them one after another, hidden in shadows, thinking they could outweight her. They never could. Her rifle cracked again and again, each shot a word in a language only she and the sky understood. And the sky, merciless and vast, kept asking her the same question. Will you still rise? Her answer was always the same. By the time the first edge of dawn broke across the horizon, her body was nearly gone. Her shoulder bled freely, her hands were raw, her breath shallow. But the ridge still stood. The enemy retreated, leaving their dead in the valley. She descended from the outpost slowly, her steps heavy, her rifle dragging slightly at her side. The men watched in silence. Some lowered their heads, others straightened their backs, but none spoke. They didn't need to. The captain met her at the bottom. His face was drawn, his eyes burning. "You kept us alive again. Dawn is here. Reinforcements are close, but I don't know how much more your body can take." She lifted her gaze, her voice quiet but unbroken. "It isn't my body that holds this ridge. It's silence, and silence hasn't released me yet." That night, before exhaustion claimed her, she wrote once more. "They think I am flesh, and maybe I am. But tonight I felt myself fading into something else. I am no longer the daughter of a sniper, no longer just a woman among soldiers. I am silence, and silence speaks through me. If tomorrow I fall, let it be said that silence never lied." Dawn rose pale and fragile, but it was not peace. It was only the pause between storms. Reinforcements were still a day away, maybe less, maybe more, the kind of promise that war always kept half broken. The ridge stood, but it was scarred, its trenches crumbling, its men running on fumes of courage and fragments of hope. And she was no longer sure where her body ended and the rifle began. Her shoulder had swollen into purple and black, her eyes burned with sleepless nights, and every breath came sharp, as if her lungs themselves resisted. Yet when she held the rifle, when the world narrowed to a single scope and a single heartbeat, all the pain dissolved into silence. And in silence, she belonged. The SEAL captain studied her differently now. He no longer looked for proof. He looked for signs. Signs she might collapse. Signs she might break. Signs he could not allow because the ridge's survival had fused itself to hers. His words to her were fewer but heavier. "If you can hold one more night," he said, his voice low, "we'll live to see the reinforcements. But if you fall before dawn, we fall with you," she nodded once. No speeches. No promises. Just the quiet certainty that had always been her answer. That evening, as the sun sank behind broken hills, the valley stirred again. Not in small movements, not in scattered probes, but in waves. Trucks rumbled through the mist, artillery lit the horizon, drones swarmed overhead. The ground trembled under the weight of it. The enemy had come to break the ridge once and for all. The men braced in their trenches, their eyes wide, their breaths shallow. And again they looked at her. She felt their fear pressing against her skin, their belief heavier than any rifle. She climbed the outpost slowly, each step a defiance of her body's weakness, until she lay flat against the earth, scope pressed to her eye. The valley exploded with fire. Shells tore into the ridge. Drones screamed through the sky, bullets stitched across the ground. But she held steady. Through the chaos, she searched, waiting for the flicker, the glint, the shadow. There, a sniper hidden among shattered stone. She fired. The crack split the air, the figure collapsed. Another flicker, another shot. Another ghost gone. The enemy pressed harder, their artillery pounding, their soldiers advancing. But every time a sniper tried to speak, her silence answered louder. She moved with mechanical patience, her breath slow, her fingers steady, each shot as precise as if the valley itself whispered the coordinates. Her body screamed with each recoil, blood soaking her bandage, her hands trembling when they weren't wrapped around steel. But the ridge still stood. Every bullet she fired became a wall. Every ghost, she silenced another second bot. Below, the captain's voice roared through the radio. "Hold!" She's keeping them blind, hold the line. Hold. The word had become her existence. She whispered it under her breath like prayer, her scope blurring with smoke, her eyes stinging, but her silence did not falter. One more shot. One more second. One more ghost, hours stretched into lifetimes. The night grew heavy, the valley glowing with fire. Her rifle grew hot in her hands, the metal burning against her skin. She thought of her father, of his lessons, of his voice whispering, "The rifle is not yours. It is the sky's. You are only its witness." And she understood then. She was no longer only a daughter, no longer only a soldier. She was the silence itself, carried in steel and breath. When the first light of dawn bled across the horizon, the enemy broke. Their artillery fell silent, their drones retreated, their trucks crawled back into the mist. The ridge still stood. Barely, but it stood. She lowered her rifle slowly, her hands shaking, her body collapsing into the earth. The men in the trenches roared with disbelief and awe, some crying, some laughing, all alive because she had refused to let silence end them. The SEAL captain climbed to the outpost himself. He stood over her, his face streaked with dirt and smoke, his eyes burning. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then quietly, "You didn't just hold the ridge tonight. You held the war itself." She looked up at him, her lips pale, her breath shallow. "I only answered when silence asked." That night, when the ridge finally slept, she opened her notebook one more time. Her hands trembled, her words crooked, but she forced them onto the page. If dawn had not come, I would not have stopped. If my body had fallen, silence would still have spoken through me. I am not the myth they whisper, not the ghosts they fear. I am only a voice borrowed from silence. And as long as silence calls, I will rise again. She closed the notebook, pressed it to her chest, and let exhaustion drag her into sleep. For the first time in weeks, it was not the restless sleep of waiting, but the deep, empty kind that comes only after giving everything. And the ridge, battered and scarred, waited for the sound of engines in the distance, the sound of reinforcements arriving at last. The morning after the assault carried with it a silence heavier than any bombardment. Not the silence of calm, but the silence of bodies too tired to speak, of men whose hands trembled when they tried to light a cigarette, of soldiers staring blankly at the sky as if afraid it might collapse. The ridge had survived again, but survival felt less like victory and more like a sentence. She woke with her rifle still beside her, her notebook pressed to her chest. Her shoulder was bound in fresh bandages, but blood had already seeped through. When she stood, her legs nearly buckled beneath her, but habit pushed her forward. The camp needed to see her. Not smiling, not strong, not invincible, but present. The SEAL captain was waiting at the edge of camp, binoculars in hand, his face shadowed with exhaustion. He lowered them when he saw her approach. His voice was rough, scraped by sleepless nights. "Scouts confirm it. Reinforcements are on the way. Engines in the distance. A few hours at most." The words should have felt like salvation, but they didn't. She only nodded, her gaze drifting to the valley below, where smoke still curled from the scars of last night's battle. "A few hours is still a lifetime," she murmured. The captain studied her for a long moment. He didn't question her anymore, didn't demand. He simply asked, "Can you hold until then?" Her silence was answer enough. By noon, the sound came, low at first, then growing louder. Engines rumbling across broken roads, the rhythmic thud of boots, the heavy grind of armored vehicles. Reinforcements. Soldiers turned their heads toward the sound, some whispering prayers, others letting out hollow laughs of disbelief. For the first time in weeks, the ridge did not feel like a grave. But relief is fragile in war. The enemy heard the engines too. Before the convoy reached the ridge, gunfire erupted in the valley again. Mortars flared, shells cracked against the earth. The enemy wasn't trying to destroy the ridge this time. They were trying to stop the reinforcements from arriving. She climbed the outpost one more time. Her body screamed against her, but she ignored it. Through her scope, she saw them. Enemy rifles trained not on the ridge, but on the roads where the convoy advanced. She steadied her breath, her finger tightening. The rifle cracked. A gunner dropped. She shifted, fired again. Another fell. Every shot she fired was not just for the ridge anymore. It was for the road ahead, for the men marching toward them, for the chance that the ridge might finally pass its weight to others. She moved faster now, her body raw, her breath ragged, but her silence unbroken. The SEAL captain's voice barked through the radio. "Keep them clear! Reinforcements are almost here, almost." The word pressed against her like a blade. Almost was not enough. Almost was still death. She fired again and again, until the valley blurred before her eyes. Then, through the smoke, she saw them. Armored trucks cresting the hill. Soldiers spilling forward, their uniforms clean. Their faces sharp with determination. The reinforcements had arrived. The camp below erupted with shouts, cheers, voices breaking with relief. Some wept openly, dropping their rifles in disbelief. The ridge was no longer alone. She lowered her rifle slowly, her body trembling, her vision hazy. The men in the trenches looked up at her, some lifting their hands in salute, others simply bowing their heads. The SEAL captain climbed to the outpost, his face streaked with dirt and something softer beneath. "Gratitude. You held," he said simply. She looked at him, her lips pale, her breath shallow. Silence held. I only answered. That night, as reinforcements fortified the ridge, she sat apart from the noise of new voices, her notebook open on her lap. Her words were slower now, each one a fragment of breath. They came. And the ridge will stand. But I know what the men do not. The war does not end with reinforcements. It only moves. And when it moves, silence will call me again. She closed the notebook, pressing it against her chest, and for the first time since her first shot, she allowed herself to sleep deeply. Around her, the ridge buzzed with new life, new soldiers, new hope. But she knew hope was fragile. And she knew the sky never released those who had once answered its silence. The ridge no longer felt like the same place once reinforcements settled in. New uniforms filled the trenches, new voices shouted orders, new boots stamped over the same mud that had once swallowed silence. The men who had survived alongside her looked older now, their faces hollow, their shoulders bowed. The fresh soldiers brought with them the energy of those who had not yet learned what it cost to endure nights where seconds stretched like lifetimes. She moved through the camp quietly. As always, her rifle slung across her back, her notebook pressed against her ribs. But now the stares she felt were different. From the new men, it wasn't disbelief. It was curiosity, almost reverence. They had heard whispers before they arrived. Whispers of a single shot that had silenced ghosts, of a woman who had held an entire ridge alone. Whispers that sounded more like myth than flesh. The SEAL captain noticed it too. His eyes followed her whenever she crossed the camp, his jaw tight, his silence heavier than before. He had once doubted her, then commanded her, then relied on her. Now he seemed to stand at the edge of something else, recognition that she had become more than a soldier in his line. She had become the story itself, but stories are dangerous. On the second night after reinforcements, an argument broke out near the fire. A young soldier, face still clean, hands uncalloused by the weight of war, asked bluntly, "Is it true? Did she really kill more men in a week than a whole platoon?" An older survivor, his voice rough, spat into the dirt. "More than that. Without her, you wouldn't be here. Without her, the ridge would be nothing but ashes." The young one laughed nervously, as if the truth was too large to believe. "She's just one person." The older one's eyes hardened. One person was enough. She heard it from a distance. She didn't step closer. She didn't need to. The war had already shifted her into something she hadn't chosen to be. A legend told even when she wasn't in the room. That night, the captain called her aside. His tent was dim, lanterns casting sharp shadows across maps that no longer carried the same urgency. Reinforcements had changed the balance, but his voice was low, heavy, stripped of command. "They're building you into something larger than life," he said. "Half of them think you're not even real. The other half think you're invincible. Either way, they don't see you anymore. They see the myth." She met his gaze, her voice calm, almost weary. "Myth or not, the ridge still stands," he exhaled, running a hand over his face. "But what about you? How long before they stop asking what you can do and start demanding it?" "Myths don't get to rest. Myths don't get to bleed." Her silence was her answer. She had been bleeding long before anyone noticed. The next day, she climbed the outpost again. Not because she was ordered, not because it was necessary. Reinforcements were already covering the valley with heavy fire. But because silence still called her. She lay there with her rifle, scope pressed to her eye, the valley stretched out before her. Hours passed. No shots, no movements. Only the sound of distant engines and the quiet murmur of soldiers below. But she remained still, watching, waiting. Because she knew legends are not fed by glory, but by vigilance. At dusk, she wrote in her notebook again, "They think I am a story now." A shadow whispered between trenches, a miracle that carried them through the night. But I am still only me. I bleed, I ache, I break. Yet maybe that is what makes the myth stronger. That I am both ghost and flesh, silence and voice, fragility and aim. And if they cannot see me as I am, then let them see me as silence meant me to be. The ridge no longer belonged to the men. It no longer belonged to the reinforcements. It belonged to her silence, to her rifle, to the truth spoken by a single shot. And whether she wanted it or not, she had become what her father warned her she would. Not a soldier of numbers, but a soldier of moments. And the moment had become eternal. The ridge was no longer just a position on a map. It was a story. Reinforcements dug trenches deeper, stacked crates of ammunition, set up heavier weapons, but their eyes, even the newcomers, always drifted back to her. She had become the measure of the impossible, the proof that a single rifle could hold back an army. But stories, once born, have a way of reaching the enemy too. And the enemy began to change. No longer did they send snipers in ones and twos hoping to catch her unaware. They had learned she could see through their shadows, that her silence cut deeper than their camouflage. Now they turned to something else. Swarms of drones, artillery set far beyond her range, machines to drown her rather than outmatch her. They knew they couldn't outshoot her, but perhaps they could outlast her. She felt it the first night the strategy shifted. The valley didn't shimmer with the faint glint of glass. There were no rival scopes waiting to duel her impatience. Instead, the sky itself filled with buzzing machines, a hive of metal wings circling like vultures. They weren't looking for soldiers in trenches. They were looking for her. Through her scope, she tracked them, one by one. She fired, dropped one, then another. But for every drone that fell, two more appeared. The captain's voice crackled through the radio. "They're not after the line. They're after you," she already knew. Her father's warning came back to her like an old echo. When they cannot beat your silence, they will try to make it scream. Her shoulder throbbed with each recoil, her bandages damp with blood. Her body screamed to stop, but she held steady. Each drone that fell bought them seconds, and seconds in war were as precious as gold. By dawn, the sky cleared. The ridge was battered but unbroken. She descended from the outpost, legs heavy, rifle dragging slightly at her side. Soldiers stepped aside for her again, their silence louder than any cheer. The SEAL captain met her at the bottom. His face was drawn, his eyes shadowed. "They'll keep coming. Not with men. With machines. They've stopped fighting the ridge." "They're fighting you," she met his gaze calmly. "Then they've already lost. Because I'm not fighting for me." His brow furrowed. "Then for who?" Her eyes lifted to the horizon, where dawn bled weakly through smoke. For silence. For the truth it carries. For every second it lets us live. That night, she wrote in her notebook with hands that trembled too much to keep the ink straight. "I am no longer hidden. They know me now. They fear me. And in fear, they waste their strength trying to erase me. But silence cannot be erased. It can only wait. And I will wait with it." The men who read her only through whispers did not understand. They thought her calm came from certainty, that she believed herself untouchable. But the truth burned inside her. She knew every day might be the one silence stopped answering. And yet, she kept listening. Because war does not release those who have once become its voice. when the camp slept. She sat awake under the stars, her rifle across her lap, her notebook pressed to her chest. Above her, the sky stretched wide and merciless. She whispered into it, her words dissolving into the night. "If tomorrow you call, I will rise again. And if you don't, then let me rest knowing I never let you down." The horizon offered no reply. But the silence was answer enough. The ridge had been saved, but it no longer felt safe. Reinforcements filled the trenches, mounted heavy guns, patrolled the valley with fresh eyes. Yet beneath the noise of boots and engines, there was an unspoken truth. Everyone knew the war here was no longer about ground, or maps, or even strategy. It was about her. The whispers traveled faster than bullets. A woman sniper who had held the ridge through nights of fire, who had silenced ghosts in the mist, who had killed an enemy marksman trained as she had been trained. Her legend spread not just among her own men, but across the valley, seeping into enemy ranks. Fear carried her name further than she ever could. But fear, she knew, was a double-edged weapon. It made soldiers hesitate. It made commanders cautious. But it also painted a target brighter than any flare. On the 12th night, the ridge did not face a bombardment. There were no drones, no shells tearing the ground, no artillery shaking the earth. Instead, the valley was quiet. Too quiet. Soldiers shifted nervously, their fingers tight on triggers, eyes darting to her as if waiting for her silence to break first. She climbed the outpost as always, rifle across her shoulder, notebook against her ribs. Through her scope, she searched. Mist hung low, moonlight silvering the broken landscape. But there was no movement. No flicker of glass. No reflection of steel. Only stillness. Hours passed. Nothing. And then she felt it, not in her eyes, but in her skin. The air was wrong, heavy, the kind of silence that was not absence, but intent. She adjusted her scope again, sweeping slower. And there it was, the faintest ripple in the grass. Too measured to be wind. Too patient to be chance. Her finger settled on the trigger. She exhaled, released. The crack split the night, the ripple vanished. The camp stirred. Soldiers whispered. The SEAL captain's voice came through the radio, steady but sharp. "What did you see?" Her answer was quiet. Not one, many. And she was right. Shadows rose from the valley, dozens of them, moving as one. Not snipers. Not a scattered advance. A unit, a hunt. They weren't trying to storm the ridge. They were trying to surround it, to corner her, to make her choose between being hunted or fleeing. She fired again, the rifle cracking in rhythm with her heartbeat. One figure fell, then another. The men in the trenches opened fire, the night erupting with chaos. But the enemy did not scatter this time. They pressed forward, relentless, as if they had no interest in the ridge itself, only in reaching her. The captain's voice thundered through the radio. "They're after you! Fall back!" But she did not move. Her cheek pressed against the stock, her eyes steady in the scope. She fired, shifted, fired again. Every shot broke silence. Every silence bought them another second. The ridge shook with gunfire, the valley a storm of shadows and sparks. And through it all, she remained steady, her body screaming, her hands raw, her shoulder tearing with every recoil. When dawn broke, the valley was littered with bodies. The enemy had retreated once more, leaving their dead in the grass. The ridge stood. But so did the truth. She was no longer a hidden ghost. She was the center of their war. As she descended from the outpost, blood soaking through her bandages, the men stepped aside again. Some reached to touch her shoulder as if to prove she was real. Others averted their eyes, afraid of the weight they saw in her. The captain met her at the bottom. His voice was rough, his words sharp. "You can't keep this up. They'll keep coming until you fall." She looked at him, her voice soft but unshaken. "Then let them come. Silence will decide when I fall, not them." That night, her notebook filled again. They sent more than shadows tonight. They sent men who believed their numbers would drown me. But silence is not drowned. Silence waits. And in waiting, it sees what others do not. If I am to die here, it will not be as their target. It will be as silence's witness. She closed the notebook, pressed it against her chest, and lay back beneath the stars. The ridge was quiet again, but it was not peace. It was only waiting. And waiting, she had learned, was the truest sound of war. The ridge had become something heavier than stone, heavier than earth. It was now carried on her shoulders alone. The men fought, the captain commanded. The reinforcements fortified. but all of them, in unspoken agreement, turned their eyes to her when the night deepened, when the mist thickened. When the silence grew too heavy to bear, she had become more than flesh. To them, she was inevitability. But inevitability breaks the human frame. Her shoulder was torn, her ribs bruised, her hands swollen. Every breath came ragged, every night longer than the last. And still she climbed the outpost. Still she pressed her cheek to the rifle. Still she searched the valley. The camp no longer ordered her there. She went because silence demanded it. And silence, relentless, never ceased calling. Yet whispers had begun to change. Around the fires at night, new soldiers murmured not of her skill, but of her nature. She doesn't bleed like us. She doesn't sleep. She doesn't even seem human anymore. The older ones, the ones who had seen her stand when no one else dared, corrected them in harsh tones. She's human, and she's dying piece by piece to keep us alive. But doubt spread like smoke. Even reverence turned to fear when it lingered too long. The SEAL captain sensed it. He found her at the outpost one evening, her body hunched, her scope steady despite the tremor in her hands. He crouched beside her, his voice low. "They're starting to believe you're not real." A myth in human skin. And myths, they stop inspiring men. They start haunting them. She didn't move, her eye fixed on the valley. "I never asked to be their story. I only asked to listen to silence." He sighed, his voice strained. "And when silence asks too much?" She let the question linger, then whispered, "Then I'll give until there is nothing left." That night, the valley came alive again. Not with artillery, not with swarms, but with shadows. An entire unit crawling through mist, patient, silent, disciplined. Not reckless attackers, hunters. The enemy had learned. She saw them through her scope, one by one, rising from grass like ghosts. She fired, dropped one, shifted, fired again. But for every one she silenced, another advanced. The ridge thundered with gunfire as soldiers scrambled, but fear spread faster than bullets. The captain's voice cut through the radio, sharp and urgent. "Fall back. They're surrounding you." But she did not move. Her cheek pressed to the rifle, her breath slow, her body still. She whispered to herself the words her father had given her. A sniper's end is not in being shot. It is in being silent when silence still asks. Her shots cracked through the night, each one steady despite the shaking in her body. She dropped another and another until her vision blurred, her breath shallow. She felt herself fading, but her finger never faltered. By dawn, the valley was littered again with bodies. The enemy retreated, their hunt unfinished. The ridge stood, but when she descended, the soldiers did not cheer. They looked at her with wide, uncertain eyes. Some stepped back as if afraid of her. Others stared with something closer to worship, but twisted with unease. The captain met her at the bottom. His voice was heavy, his words deliberate. "You've become more than you can carry. They don't see you anymore. They see something else. And if you're not careful, they'll stop following you out of hope and start following you out of fear." She lowered her gaze, her voice quiet. "It doesn't matter how they see me. What matters is that silence still speaks through me. And as long as it does, the ridge will stand." That night, she opened her notebook, her handwriting jagged from trembling hands. "I feel myself fading. They no longer look at me as one of them. They look at me as something beyond, something untouchable. But I am only flesh. I am only breath. And each shot cost me another piece of both. Still I will give because silence has not yet released me. And when it does, I pray they remember not the myth, but the truth. That I was only a woman who listened when no one else dared." She closed the notebook and lay back under the stars, her rifle beside her. The sky above was vast, merciless, endless. She whispered into it once more. "If tomorrow you call, I will rise. And if tomorrow you don't, let me rest as your last echo." The ridge no longer felt like ground beneath her boots. It felt like a stage suspended between earth and sky, and she the unwilling figure placed at its center. Soldiers no longer asked her to fire. They expected her to. The silence of the nights had become unbearable without the crack of her rifle cutting through it. Every time the mist rolled in, their eyes turned to her, not with hope alone, but with the dependency of men who had forgotten how to breathe without her answering first. She felt the weight of it in her bones. Her shoulder was little more than torn flesh, her ribs bound so tightly she could barely draw breath. Her eyes burned constantly, blurred from the long hours staring through glass. Yet her hands, when wrapped around the rifle, were always steady. The silence steadied them. The SEAL captain came to her on the 14th night, his face harder than the steel plates that lined the trench walls. He didn't bring maps this time, nor orders. He brought only words stripped bare. They don't see you anymore. Not as flesh. Not as soldier. You've become something else, something they both need and fear. If you fall now, you won't just be another casualty. You'll take the ridge with you. She looked at him, her voice quiet, unwavering. Then I cannot fall. His jaw tightened. No one carries war forever. Her eyes drifted past him, out to the horizon where the mist thickened once more. I never asked to carry war. I only asked to carry silence. And silence doesn't end. It only changes its witness. That night, the valley came alive in a way it never had before. Not with scattered attacks. Not with probing hunts. But with everything. The enemy unleashed their full weight. Artillery from the hills, drones swarming like locusts, trucks rumbling forward with relentless force. The sky burned red, the earth shook, the ridge itself seemed to crumble. Soldiers shouted, some fired wildly, others froze with terror. The captain roared orders, his voice nearly drowned by thunder, and she climbed the outpost once more. Her body was already broken, her shoulder bleeding fresh through the bandages, her breath ragged. Yet as she pressed her cheek to the rifle, the world narrowed again to a scope. A single line of sight, a silence that demanded her answer. She fired. One sniper fell. She shifted, fired again. A drone collapsed in sparks. Her rifle cracked like a heartbeat, steady, relentless, cutting through chaos. The men below clung to the sound of her shots like lifelines. Every crack told them they were not yet dead, that the ridge still stood, that the silence had not abandoned them. Hours stretched into eternity. Her body screamed, her vision dimmed, but her finger never faltered. Each bullet was an echo, each echo another second stolen from death. Then it happened. A shell struck near the outpost, the ground erupting in flame and dirt. She was thrown back, her rifle slipping from her hands, her notebook tumbling into the mud. For a moment, everything blurred, sound gone, breath stolen, the world spinning. She reached for the rifle, her fingers slick with blood, her body refusing. But then she heard it. Not a sound, but the absence of one. The silence asking again. Her hand closed around the stock. She dragged the rifle back to her cheek, scope pressed against her bruised eye. Through the haze, she saw it. A figure moving through the mist, rifle glinting, scope aimed not at the trenches, not at the captain, but at her. She exhaled, released. The crack split the chaos. The figure dropped. The ridge roared with new life, men shouting, firing, holding the line. Reinforcements pressed forward, the enemy faltering. And through it all, she lay on the ground, her cheek still pressed to the rifle, her breath shallow, her blood pooling. The captain climbed to her side, his face pale beneath dirt and smoke. He knelt, his voice breaking for the first time. You've given everything. You can stop now. Her lips moved, barely a whisper. Silence hasn't released me yet. That night, she wrote in her notebook with trembling fingers, ink smeared by blood. The sky is heavier, the silence longer. They see me as myth, as ghost, as something beyond them. But I know the truth. I am still only flesh, and when flesh is gone, silence will find another witness. Until then, I remain. She closed the notebook with what strength she had left and lay beneath the torn sky. The ridge still stood, but she knew the next dawn would demand more than flesh could give. Dawn came slowly, reluctant, as if even the sun feared to rise over the ridge. The night's battle had left the earth scarred, trenches collapsed, weapons twisted, bodies scattered like shadows that would never rise again. Smoke clung to the valley, curling upward in faint gray ribbons, as though the world itself was exhaling. She lay still at the outpost, her rifle across her chest, her cheek pressed to the dirt. Every muscle screamed. Every breath was a knife. Her shoulder was torn open, her hands blistered raw, her ribs cracked from the shock of the explosion. And yet, her fingers still curled around the rifle, refusing to release. The SEAL captain stood over her, silent. His face was streaked with ash, his eyes hollowed by nights without rest. But his voice when it came was soft, almost reverent. The reinforcements are here. The ridge is safe. You don't need to climb again. She turned her head slowly, her lips pale, her breath thin. The ridge is never safe. It only waits. He wanted to argue, but he didn't. He knew by now that silence owned her more than any commander ever could. The soldiers who had once doubted her, once whispered of luck or myth, now moved around her as if around a relic. They touched their helmets when she passed, lowered their heads, some afraid to speak in her presence. To them, she was no longer just a sniper. She was the reason the ridge still stood, the embodiment of every shot that had bought them another sunrise. But she knew the truth. Myths grow when flesh begins to fade, and her flesh was fading fast. That evening, the captain brought her the notebook he had found in the mud, the pages stained with blood and rain. He placed it in her hands without a word. She held it against her chest, as she always did, as if it was more than paper, an anchor against vanishing. When night fell, she climbed the outpost one last time. Not because she was ordered, not because the ridge demanded it, but because silence did. She lay there with her rifle, her cheek against the cold earth, her eye pressed to the scope. The valley stretched out, broken, scarred, but alive. For hours she waited. No shots came. No shadows rose. Only silence, thick and endless. For the first time, the silence did not ask her to answer. It simply stayed. Her breath slowed. Her grip on the rifle loosened. She let her eyes close, her cheek still resting against the stock, as though she might wake at any moment to fire again. At dawn, the soldiers found her like that. Still, calm, her rifle across her chest, her notebook beside her. Some wept openly. Others stood in silence, saluting. The captain lifted her notebook with hands that shook more than he would ever admit. He opened it to the last page. The words were smeared, but they could still be read. No one knew. Not until I fired. And when I did, silence spoke through me. If I am gone, let the silence speak for itself. It never needed me. It only needed someone to listen. They buried her on the ridge she had held, the rifle at her side, the notebook pressed against her heart. The captain gave no speech. He only said, she was the silence we all survived by. And in the years that followed, her story grew. Soldiers spoke of the woman who had stood when no one else dared, who had silenced ghosts with a single shot, who had become myth because she refused to let silence die. The enemy spoke of her too. They called her the ghost of the ridge, the sniper who never missed, the shadow that lived inside silence. And some swore that even after her death, when the mist was heavy and the valley too quiet, they could still hear the faint crack of her rifle in the distance. No one knew she was trained by a legendary sniper. No one knew she carried silence itself in her bones. Not until a single shot spoke the truth, and long after her body was gone, the truth remained.